Hello everybody, my name is Oliver Llewellyn, and in light of Pride Month that has just passed this June, I'm here to talk to you about the huge problem of sexual orientation discrimination taking place in Australia. Although this issue has been greatly improved on recently, Australia has had a bad history of non-acceptance towards members of the LGBT community in the nation, and that still continues to this day. For those who may not know much about Australia, it is a large island nation located in between the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific Ocean. It is well known due to the Sydney Opera House, which is considered as one of the new 7 wonders of the world, and the beautiful city of Melbourne, which was ranked as the most livable city in the world from 2011 to 2017. With that out of the way, let's begin by explaining what exactly sexual orientation discrimination is, and in this case, the clue is in the name. It is the discrimination towards people on the basis of their sexual orientation, for example being gay or bisexual. Although they are not technically considered as sexual orientations, I will also discuss being transgender or transsexual in this video, as they are very tightly linked with this subject and often go hand in hand with being queer. Queer in this sense being the umbrella term for sexualities that are non-mainstream and not the derogatory term. Now that we understand what sexual orientation discrimination actually is, we can have a look at what this has to do with Australia. When you think of modernised and developed nations, your mind may wander to the likes of Australia, with its picturesque coastlines, thrilling attractions, and westernised lifestyle. However, it has been considered to be surprisingly backwards when it comes to the acceptance of the LGBT community compared to its modern culture. The people of Australia were not the issue here, as the percentage of the Australian population that accepts homosexuality currently sits at 79%. So why is it that the LGBT community wasn't accepted or supported in this nation until very recent times? To find this out, we will have to look back to 1788, when Australia was colonised by the British Empire. Since they were under the power of the British, the Australian laws at that time were based off the already existing British laws, such as the Buggery Act of 1553, which prohibited unnatural sexual acts. The small LGBT community in Australia had to suppress themselves up until the 20th century, as homosexual activity was considered a capital crime, meaning they could have been executed for it before 1890. After that year, the sentence was reduced to life in prison gradually across the nation, with the state of Victoria changing at last in 1949. By the late 1960s, the underground LGBT community began to emerge, with the first lesbian and gay rights organisations being established. Examples of these include the ACT Homosexual Law Reform Society and the Campaign Against Moral Persecution, otherwise known as CAMP. It was this organisation in particular that had the largest impact upon the nation, beginning the early gay rights movements. After just 1 year of existence, CAMP had set up groups in every Australian capital city, as well as many universities. Following this, many other gay rights organisations were set up, and things for the LGBT community in Australia began to take a turn for the better. The Australian Medical Association removed homosexuality from its list of illnesses and disorders in 1973, and South Australia became the first state to legalise sexual conduct between consenting males in 1975. For International Homosexual Solidarity Day, around 500 people marched through George Street to take part in a rally in Martin Plaza on the 24th of June, 1978. Despite the police force attacking and arresting 53 revellers at a late-night party, the event occurred every year after that, becoming now what is known as the Sydney Lesbian and Gay Mardi Gras Festival. The last gay man to be arrested in Australia was sentenced to 8 months of jail time on the 14th of December 1984. By 1997, the entirety of Australia had legalised sexual conduct between consenting males, with Tasmania being the last state to repeal their laws. Things were on the right track for the LGBT community in Australia, but a new problem had arisen. John Howard, a strong supporter of the laws prohibiting gay marriage, was elected president in 1996. He was one of the reasons why same-sex marriage took so long to be implemented in Australia. He would refuse to associate with the LGBT community in any way, turning down the opportunity to give a message of support to the Sydney Lesbian and Gay Mardi Gras Festival in 1997, and on a TV show named A Current Affair, he said that he would be disappointed if one of his children told him that they were lesbian or gay. He also reduced the amount of interdependency visas in the July of 1996, causing difficulties for the migration of same-sex couples. John Howard then went on to declare the first laws that would have allowed gay couples to adopt children, an aspect of the new ACT Bill of Rights, to be unfit in the March of 2004. He explained that he thought it was ridiculous that ACT would have a Bill of Rights, and that he was against gay adoption just as much as he was against gay marriage. In September 2003, the Australian federal government was announced as violating equality and privacy rights under the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights by the UN Human Rights Commission. And sorry, I couldn't say that bit without the script. The government refused to give a man a spouse veteran's pension due to his 38-year-long relationship with another man, and then ignored the UN's further requests to treat couples of the same sex equally. Furthermore, in 2004, Philip Ruddock, who was the Federal Attorney General, the main legal advisor for the federal government of Australia, created the Marriage Legislation Amendment Bill to make sure that there was no possibility of same-sex marriage at all. News of same-sex marriages occurring in other countries was also censored in Australia. When the ACT government declared that they would be creating civil union groups for same-sex couples on March 2006, the Howard government vowed that they would stop at nothing to prevent this. The Australian public was greatly angered by this, and the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission recognised this and decided to bring in a half-year-long survey to hear the public opinion on the treatment of homosexuals. In retaliation, the federal government banned all of its departments from making submissions to this survey. The government planned to introduce more anti-LGBT laws, such as the family law, but John Howard lost the vote in 2007 and they never got the chance to implement them. Now, despite all the problems being caused for the LGBT community by the Howard government, the individual states and territories of Australia had been very progressive since 2001 and were moving quickly towards equality for homosexuals. The addition of a new definition of a de facto partner in states such as Queensland or Western Australia has done a great deal to reduce legislative discrimination towards the LGBT community. Same-sex couples were categorised as domestic partners in South Australia when they began to be recognised in 2006, and places such as New South Wales and Melbourne offered limited legal recognition to homosexuals. By the 2010s, the support of the LGBT community by the federal government increased dramatically, with the age of consent being equalised across Australia in 2016 and the first nationwide anti-discrimination law being introduced. The adoption laws preventing same-sex couples from adopting children was amended in 6 states and territories by 2018. Despite all these great improvements, there was still one large issue. It remained against the law to marry another member of the same sex. Something called the Evermore Pledge was created as a solution to this, in which 2 members of the same sex could pledge in marriage together, but it still wasn't considered a proper marriage in the eyes of the government. Therefore, the couple taking part in this would not receive the legal recognition and rights of a married couple, such as automatic rights to inheritance and property. This was also not the solution in the eyes of the LGBT community, as they didn't want to be treated differently than the rest of the population. They wanted acceptance and equal treatment just like everyone else. 22 attempts to legalise same-sex marriage failed from 2004 to 2017, but in that year the government agreed to conducting a voluntary postal survey to see the nation's opinion on the matter. It was revealed that 61.6% of Australia agreed to and supported same-sex marriage. On the 9th of December in 2017, it was announced that gay marriage was to become legal in Australia, and on the 15th of the same month, the first gay marriage to be held under Australian law occurred. When I was visiting the UK in June, I had the opportunity to interview Cressida Stanley Williams, who does voluntary work for an LGBT organisation and is a proud member of the LGBT community herself. I questioned her on what kind of work she does for this organisation and other intriguing related topics, so enjoy the interview and see what she has to say on these subjects. So, can you introduce yourself for us?
I can. My name is Cressida Stanley Williams. I've been involved with LGBT plus staff networks and HouseProud for the last 5 years.
So, is that the name of the organisation that you volunteer for?
Yeah, it's called HouseProud. Well, it's a housing sector, so social housing sectors, staff network. So for housing professionals. It's a voluntary organisation. It's governed by a committee, a management committee. I'm co-chair. We have a male identifying chair and a female identifying chair. HouseProud's been around for 5 years now, and essentially what we try and create is a sector-wide staff network for housing professionals. The reason we do that is because it helps to support our colleagues where they don't have staff networks internally to their organisation. We can lobby Parliament, we can do responses to government consultations. I represent the housing sector at things like Pride.
Yeah, okay. And so that's the kind of work it does in general. What kind of work do you personally do as a member of this organisation?
So I am co-chair of the committee, so we're essentially the governing part of the organisation.
Okay.
So on the committee we have a number of different roles. We have officers that manage the membership. We've got over 200 members and over 100 member organisations. We have people that manage the events. We have people that manage all the communications. And then overseeing everyone within the committee are the co-chairs.
Okay, so you just kind of organise how it's...
We have an administration officer to do some of that, but we will set the agenda, set what the themes are going to be for the year, produce an annual report, try and keep meetings to time. Always a challenge when you're running meetings, but generally we'll be the ones that will go out and talk about HouseProud. We're meeting with the Chief Executive of our social housing professional body in a couple of weeks. And we're also responsible for progressing our research as well and how we take that forward in the social housing sector.
And so what would you say the impact that this organisation has had on the LGBT community as a whole?
I think it's less about, well, there's a whole thing anyway about visibility. There's the issue and the need for staff networks so we can promote that to people. But our work is probably more centred around the LGBT plus community within the housing sector because we're for housing professionals. So certainly being able to provide a network for people that haven't got it is a really important part of what we do. But for the LGBT social housing sector, we not only have a focus on staff, but we have a focus on residents and tenants. Which is really important.
How would you say the recognition and the acceptance of the whole LGBT community has grown since you first became a part of it?
So in terms of where I've seen improvements and changes, obviously within the UK, and I know that your focus is Australia as well in this, for this piece of work, we've seen the introduction of marriage, the Equality Act in 2010 did a lot for that, but actually there seems to be amongst our straight allies a view that everything's right with the LGBT world now and that we are on the whole accepted, whereas actually that's not quite the case. And particularly recently there's been a lot of reporting around hate crime and things that have been going on in the LGBT community. I don't know whether that's to do with the fact that June is Pride Month, so there might be more reporting as a whole, but actually there's still quite a lot of work to do. That's not to say that over the last 10 years in particular that it hasn't come on in leaps and bounds, because it has. But whilst the legal stuff is there, I'd say the cultural stuff still isn't. Would I still be happy walking down the road or holding my hands with my wife in public? I would pick where I am to do that.
Speaking of Pride Month, do you think that the large companies that have been changing their logos to the Pride flag colours has made a difference to supporting of the LGBT community, or has it been more of just an outside kind of thing?
I think there is something about visibility, which is nice. I think largely it's pretty inconsequential because there will be a targeting of the pink pound behind that, which seems to be quite lucrative. That sounds really cynical. I do think it's a good thing for visibility. But sometimes I would question the actual reasons why companies do that. And whilst it's an outward demonstration to customers in the LGBT plus community, actually what's their culture like inside?
How acceptant they are to it, instead of just saying, oh, we're acceptant towards this, instead of, are they actually, or are they just saying they are?
What happens on the inside?
Are they actually making those changes? So what's your personal opinion on the late legalisation of gay marriage? Because that only came about in January this year, so it wasn't too long ago. And do you think it could have been become possible much earlier if the government there was willing to update itself more?
Of course. If it was something that they wanted to achieve, it could have been done years and years ago. So it's about where they sit and where they are on that move towards acceptance. And it's also not just about the LGBT communities, there are other factors around equality, like gender pay gaps and that kind of thing, which also has a bearing. However, what I would say is, whilst on the face of it, and this applies to the UK unfortunately, whilst on the face of it, having gay marriage is all great and good, and obviously we've got civil partnerships and gay marriage, it's a great improvement, but the laws behind it still don't match up to that. So for example, I only found out recently that in the UK, if same-sex partners choose to dissolve their union, so their civil partnership, or get divorced in their marriage, something called adultery wouldn't count unless it was within a heterosexual context.
Okay.
So same-sex adultery, it doesn't count under the law. It's only heterosexual sex adultery that counts. So actually, that's a really fundamental thing.
And that's something
that hasn't changed. So even in the UK, whilst we're further on than Australia, there's still things to be addressed. So hopefully Australia's learned from things like that, and those mistakes, and is taking that into account. Yeah, so what their version is of gay marriage may be actually leaps and bounds across our own, which has been around for longer. But it's all about the appetite really of the electorate. So whilst the government have to adjust their views and modernise, as you say, if they don't feel the electorate wants it, it's not something that the government's going to push because they want to get voted back in.
So does the organisation you work in help to create support in the LGBT community in other areas, or is it just kind of local?
So we're national, we are national. We have HouseProud Northwest and the sort of London and South one, but we are setting up other ones, which is great. So we are getting to the point we're national. Where we make the biggest difference, obviously, is for staff as well, but around having those conversations and the visibility and promoting our Pledge Culture project, which is part of our research, so we can improve the life of our tenants as well, because ultimately the organisations live for the tenants, so if we can improve that, then that's better. So moving towards national. Also, many social housing tenants would be considered more vulnerable by society, so then you've got another vulnerability or potential vulnerability layered on top of that by being LGBT+. So, where we can support our customers, then we will do.
That's very good. And so, is there anything you would personally like to see in relation to the LGBT community in the next few years? Like any improvements you'd like to see? And do you have any ideas on how to actually create these improvements, how to fabricate them?
So for me, it would be, I suppose, genuine acceptance. And actually to get genuine acceptance, given what we've seen in the media over the last month or so in particular, I think it's about really using the Equality Act to prosecute where required, or fine, or whatever the appropriate punishment would be. Because until people feel safe in their communities, they're not going to be coming out. And within a work context, which obviously what HouseProud is about, there's a lot of research about being able to bring your whole self to work. And because we work with customers and indeed some staff that also hold quite outdated views, really being able to get genuine acceptance is ultimately what we're looking for. That also relies on some of the legal stuff that I was talking about earlier. How we go about doing that though is really, it's twofold. It's constant work by people that are prepared to stand out. And having role models at work and people that are prepared to be out publicly.
It's also the kind of education of people on this subject as a whole is also something.
It is, and obviously one of the things that's been in the media a lot recently is about taking LGBT plus relationship out of the curriculum in some schools in the UK.
Oh yes, I've seen that.
So it only applies to some schools, and actually it's not, I think a lot of parents are worried that it's going to be part of the sex education, but it's not, it's about the relationship education, that these relationships exist. And while that's happening with our younger generation, who are generally way more accepting by a long chalk than your average 55-year-old, not meaning stereotype, and that is stereotyping. Whilst we're taking that out of the education, all we're doing is causing harm to those people that might already be identifying as LGBT+, or indeed be, have same-sex parents. By not acknowledging them as relationships, you're not normalising it, and it's not becoming, as you say, used throughout society. So.
Well, it's been wonderful having you on,
Thank you.
I've learnt a lot from you, so thank you a lot, Cressida, for letting me come to your house and question you. But it's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Over here.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
After that enlightening conversation with Cressida, I learnt much about the LGBT community and the inspiring work this amazing person does for it. Despite the great work done by people like herself, a large portion of the world still does not accept the LGBT community. In places like the UAE, homosexuality is punishable by jail time, beatings, torture, or even death. To improve the acceptance of the LGBT community, I believe that education on this subject is crucial. The non-accepting world needs to understand that there is absolutely nothing wrong with being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, asexual, pansexual, and any other sexual orientation. We need to understand that members of the LGBT community are just like ourselves, and something like sexual orientation is not something that should separate us or give us any reason to discriminate against others. There has recently been a controversy going around in England on the topic of LGBT subjects being taught in schools, and I personally believe that this is a great step forward in educating the next generation to be more acceptant and open-minded. This kind of education can be taught outside of school as well, with events like pride parades or marches being crucial for expanding the acceptance of the LGBT community and learning more about it. I truly hope that this video has educated you, the viewer, on this very important topic and has made an impact to the acceptance of this community, even if it is only by a minuscule amount. Thank you very much for watching, and let's see if we can reduce discrimination around the globe together. Bye bye.